In the early 18th century, England is at war with France. Queen Anne, the ruler of the country, is frail and emotionally unstable, often behaving unpredictably as she struggles with both physical pain and deep personal loss. Despite being the queen, she does not truly govern alone. Instead, she relies heavily on Sarah Churchill, the Duchess of Marlborough, her childhood friend, closest confidant, and secret lover. Sarah is strong, sharp, and politically skilled, effectively acting as the real power behind the throne. She manages the court, influences parliament, and pushes for the war to continue, making most of the critical decisions in Anne's name while also controlling her on a personal level. The queen spends her days withdrawn from court, often playing with her many rabbits, each one representing a child she lost, while avoiding the pressures of ruling. But not everyone agrees with Sarah's approach. One of her main opponents is Robert Harley, an influential politician and leader of the Tory party, who represents the landowning class that is growing increasingly frustrated with the war. Sarah, on the other hand, is aligned with the Whigs, who support continuing the war, creating a growing political divide at court. Meanwhile, Sarah's cousin, Abigail Hill, arrives at the Queen's estate by carriage, having fallen from her once noble status into poverty. On the way in, she is shoved out of the carriage and lands face first into the mud. When she reaches the palace, the servants mock her appearance and play a cruel trick, sending her straight to meet Sarah while she is still covered in filth. Trying to explain herself, Abigail reveals that her family lost everything after her father gambled away their fortune, leaving her with nothing and forcing her into servitude. She begs Sarah for any kind of work. Although unimpressed, Sarah recognizes her and agrees to help, giving her a lowly position as a kitchen maid. Abigail is sent downstairs to the servants' quarters, where she is crammed into a small room with the other maids, sleeping on the floor in harsh, crowded conditions. Life there is brutal. The other maids bully her constantly. At one point, they deliberately trick her into scrubbing with lye, using her bare hands, causing painful chemical burns. Even so, Abigail endures it, making it clear she is willing to suffer if it means surviving and possibly finding a way to rise again. One night, the queen suffers a severe attack of gout, leaving her in unbearable pain and screaming as servants and doctors struggle to calm her. Abigail is called up to the queen's chambers, where she assists Sarah in tending to the queen, witnessing firsthand both Anne's suffering and how close Sarah is to her. Determined to make herself useful, Abigail later sneaks out, steals a horse, and rides into the forest at dawn to gather medicinal herbs she knows can help reduce the swelling and pain. While searching, she comes across Samuel Massam, a young and handsome court attendant, an officer who serves close to the queen's household. He is part of the royal court, but not among the highest-ranking nobles, making him ambitious and eager to rise, much like Abigail. The two briefly lock eyes, and although there's an immediate spark, Abigail plays coy and rides off, leaving an impression on him. Back at the estate, Abigail manages to lie her way into Anne's chamber while the queen is resting, pretending the doctor sent her. She applies the herbal remedy to Anne's swollen legs, hoping to prove her worth. However, Sarah catches her in the act, and seeing it as a serious overstep, immediately orders that Abigail be punished. She is dragged back to the kitchen and is about to be whipped in front of the other servants as a warning. But before the punishment can go too far, word reaches Sarah that the queen's pain has noticeably eased. Realizing that Abigail's remedy actually worked, Sarah intervenes and stops the lashing after only a few strikes. Instead of dismissing her, Sarah calls Abigail aside for a private conversation. She recognizes that while Abigail may be reckless, she is also resourceful. Impressed by both her initiative and her knowledge, Sarah decides to take her in as a personal assistant, elevating her status within the household. With this promotion, Abigail is given her own small room, finally escaping the brutal conditions and constant bullying of the servants' quarters, her first real step upward in the court. During their conversation, Abigail reveals more about her past, explaining that her father once gambled her away in a card game to a wealthy German man, forcing her into a life where she had no control over her own body. It's clear that she is determined never to return to that kind of powerlessness again. Not long after, Abigail subtly begins positioning herself closer to the queen. She deliberately coughs in front of her, making sure it's noticed, and explains that she caught a chill while gathering the herbs that helped ease her pain, carefully planting the idea that she is both loyal and willing to suffer for the queen's sake. Robert Harley becomes increasingly desperate to stop the war, seeing it as a losing effort that is draining the country's money and pushing people to the brink. But opposing him is Sidney Godolphin, the Lord Treasurer and one of Sarah's closest political allies, who strongly supports continuing the war and argues that victory is still within reach. Both sides try to influence Queen Anne, but in reality, it is Sarah who holds the most power over her. Using that influence, Sarah convinces her that they must push forward and secure a stronger position before even considering peace. As a result, Anne agrees to double the land tax on the citizens to fund the next phase of the war, sparking outrage among the public and leaving Harley furious. At the same time, Sarah's husband, John Churchill, the Duke of Marlborough and the army's leading general, prepares to leave and continue fighting on the front lines. Despite clearly caring for him, Sarah doesn't try to stop him. She sends him off with resolve, fully committed to the cause she believes in. Later, while the two women are shooting birds together, Abigail questions her directly, asking how she can accept putting her husband in such danger. Sarah explains that she believes the war is necessary to protect the country, and that real power comes with sacrifice. She then turns the question back on Abigail, pointing out that she herself once sacrificed her own body and freedom for her father's sake, suggesting that they are not so different and that survival often comes at a cost. At a grand party, Harley seizes the opportunity to speak directly with the queen, hoping to convince her not to raise taxes further for the war. However, he struggles to get close to her, as Sarah remains constantly by the queen's side, controlling access and steering the conversation. During the event, Sarah draws attention by choosing Samuel Massam as her dance partner, performing an elaborate and energetic routine in front of the entire court. As she watches them, the queen becomes agitated and jealous, her mood shifting as she feels both ignored and replaced. Suddenly, she interrupts the evening, demanding to be taken back to her chambers. As she is being wheeled out, she calls out to Harley, and in a moment that catches Sarah off guard, admits that she may have gone too far with the tax increase, deciding it will remain as it was, instead of being raised. This decision immediately undermines Sarah's authority. Once they are alone, the tension between them erupts, and lashes out and slaps Sarah in anger, while Sarah, realizing she has pushed too far, quickly apologizes and tries to calm her. At the same time, elsewhere in the palace, Abigail sneaks into Anne's chambers to borrow books, taking advantage of the absence of both women. But as she is inside, Sarah and the queen suddenly return. Abigail hides just in time and witnesses the true intimacy of their relationship, confirming that Sarah's power over the queen is deeply personal. Realizing the significance of this, Abigail slips away unnoticed, now understanding exactly how influence at court truly works. In the hallway, Harley approaches Abigail after catching her with one of Anne's books, pointing out that she could be punished for stealing. Abigail quickly deflects, telling him that Sarah lent it to her. He then invites her on a walk outside, where he drops the pretense and asks her to spy on Sarah and the queen. Anything she hears or sees that could help him gain influence at court. Abigail refuses outright, making it clear she won't betray Sarah. Later, during another shooting practice, she tells Sarah about Harley's offer. Sarah listens, but isn't particularly surprised or concerned. Abigail insists that she can be trusted and will keep Sarah's secrets safe, implying that she already knows about her private relationship with the queen. At the same time, Sarah becomes increasingly occupied with political matters, handling finances, dealing with parliament, and managing the war. As a result, she spends less time with Anne. Without Sarah's constant attention, the queen grows lonely, restless, and emotionally unstable. Eventually, Sarah sends Abigail in her place to keep the queen company. When Abigail arrives and is dismissive and irritated, telling her to leave and sends Sarah instead. But Abigail doesn't leave. Instead, she notices the queen's rabbits and begins asking about them, and reveals that there are 17, one for each child she lost. Abigail responds with sympathy, and the queen begins to soften toward her. From then on, she allows Abigail to stay, and the two start spending more and more time together, slowly forming a new bond that begins to replace the one the queen has with Sarah. One evening, Massam sneaks into Abigail's room, attempting to charm and seduce her. Abigail stays in control of the situation, teasing him slightly before ultimately sending him away, making it clear she won't be won over that quickly. As soon as he leaves, it's revealed he's not acting alone. Harley is waiting just outside in the hallway, asking Massam if he has learned anything from her or made any progress. It becomes clear that Harley is using Massam to get close to Abigail, hoping to gather information about the queen and Sarah through her. Massam admits he hasn't gotten much yet, and Harley tells him to keep trying. Later, during another shooting practice, Sarah asks Abigail how she is finding her time with the queen. She describes Anne as an extraordinary person, though not someone who is easy to understand at first. Abigail agrees, saying she enjoys spending time with her and that she finds her kind and gentle. In the middle of their conversation, a page arrives with a message that the queen is asking to see Abigail. But instead of sending her, Sarah goes to her herself, dismissing the request and claiming that the queen is only calling for Abigail to make her jealous. After this, Sarah begins spending more time with the queen again, cutting Abigail out. Determined not to fall back into obscurity, Abigail takes a risk and shares information with Harley, telling him that the queen is expected to announce the doubling of the land tax in Parliament. At Parliament, just before the queen can make her announcement, Harley speaks first, publicly praising her for supposedly deciding not to raise the tax. This puts the queen in an uncomfortable position. When it's her turn to speak, overwhelmed and unable to handle the pressure, she suddenly faints, avoiding having to commit to a decision. Meanwhile, Abigail takes a much more direct approach. She sneaks into the queen's chambers while she is away and gets in her bed naked. When the queen arrives and questions her, Abigail claims that Sarah sent her, casually adding that she couldn't resist the comfort of the bed, and tells her to leave, clearly confused by the situation. But later, the queen calls for her again. This time, she allows Abigail to stay and asks her to massage her leg. That same evening, Sarah walks into Anne's chambers and finds Abigail naked in bed with the queen. Sarah confronts Abigail the next day, throwing books at her and accusing her of being a manipulative schemer who has deliberately inserted herself into the queen's life. Without hesitation, she strips Abigail of her position and removes her from the queen's service. But by this point, the damage is already done. Abigail has successfully begun her rise, and more importantly, has made it clear that she is no longer just a servant, but a direct rival for the role of the queen's favorite. Abigail quickly takes a drastic step. She grabs a book and repeatedly hits herself in the face, then positions herself outside Anne's chambers, crying and visibly injured. Meanwhile, Sarah explains to the queen that she dismissed Abigail because she is a liar and a thief, trying to remove her completely. But when she later sees Abigail still present, it becomes clear that the queen has overruled her. She openly admits that she enjoys having Abigail around and likes sleeping with her. In a clear shift of power, and leaves with Abigail in a carriage, circling past Sarah and deliberately leaving her behind. Later, in the bathhouse, the queen relaxes in a mud bath while Abigail tends to her. Sarah suddenly arrives and joins the queen in the bath, immediately reasserting her presence. She orders Abigail to fetch her something, but Abigail declines, insisting that she must remain with the queen at all times. Sarah mocks her for this display of loyalty, while the queen, caught between them, asks them not to argue. Trying to shift the mood, Sarah playfully draws a mustache on her face with the mud, making Anne laugh. The queen copies her, and the two giggle, while Abigail is left standing to the side, excluded. On the carriage ride back, the queen falls asleep leaning on Sarah, who whispers to Abigail that she will be back on the street in no time. Back at court, the tension escalates further as Sarah and Abigail argue over who will stay with the queen that night. This time, Sarah wins. Alone with the queen, Sarah tries to put an end to the situation, telling her that this has gone far enough. But the queen admits that she enjoys having both of them competing for her attention. She likes being desired, and even more, she enjoys watching Sarah try to win her back. The moment ends with the queen pulling Sarah close and kissing her. Realizing that Sarah and the queen's bond is still strong, Abigail decides she has to take a more extreme step, something that crosses the line, but could finally remove Sarah from her way. The next morning, Sarah goes to the queen to push her to follow through with the planned speech in Parliament about increasing the land tax, but Abigail poisons Sarah's tea. The queen hesitates, worried about how the public will react and wanting reassurance. Sarah tells her that people are meant to be led, and that she must start acting like a proper queen. The conversation ends with tension, as the queen feels pressured rather than supported. Shortly after, Sarah goes out for a ride on horseback, as usual. But as the poison begins to take effect, she becomes dizzy and disoriented. Unable to control herself, she eventually loses consciousness and falls from the saddle, her body dragged violently across the ground by the horse. When Sarah fails to return, concern spreads through the estate. However, and initially dismisses it, suggesting that Sarah might be seeking attention. Eventually, Sarah is discovered outside a brothel, severely injured, bruised, and unconscious. Abigail secretly meets with Harley and finally agrees to work with him. In return, she wants to marry Massam. Harley knows she can never do that because she's not a lady, but he agrees to help make it happen. In exchange, Abigail promises to give him access to the queen without Sarah present. With Sarah gone, the queen becomes much easier to influence. Harley uses this opportunity to shift her thinking, including revealing Abigail's relationship with Massam. Rather than opposing it, the queen is pleased and decides to support the match. To make the marriage possible, the queen elevates Abigail's status, making her a lady. Soon after, Abigail and Massam are married, securing her position permanently within the court. At the same time, Abigail and Harley begin steering the queen away from Sarah's policies. She becomes more open to ending the war. As this is happening, she also starts to worry that something may have seriously happened to Sarah. Meanwhile, Sarah regains consciousness in a brothel, badly injured, with a deep scar on her face. She demands to be released, but the people there initially refuse. Only after she manages to send word and secure payment is she finally allowed to leave. When Sarah returns to court, she is shocked to see how much has changed, especially that Abigail is now a lady. Sarah then goes to her own chambers, where she gathers letters written to her by the queen that reveal the true nature of their relationship. She confronts the queen directly, demanding that she return to her previous stance, continue the war, raise the taxes, and remove Abigail from her service, but the queen resists. At that point, Sarah pushes further, threatening to release the letters that would expose their relationship and cause a major public scandal. Hearing this, the queen feels deeply betrayed, realizing that the person she trusted most is now willing to use her private feelings against her. Feeling guilty for what she's done, Sarah burns the letters. But the damage is already done. Soon after, she is informed that she must return the keys to the queen's private chambers, effectively losing her access to the queen, and that she is no longer welcome at court. Before leaving, Sarah goes to the queen's door and tries to speak to her, apologizing and explaining that she destroyed the letters. But the queen refuses to respond, shutting her out completely. With no other choice, Sarah leaves and moves to another estate. With Sarah gone, Abigail now has full control of access to the queen. She rises fully into her new role and spends her days partying with the high class and reluctantly tending to the queen. At the same time, the queen's stance on the war begins to weaken. With both Harley and Abigail influencing her, she becomes more open to ending it. Sidney Godolphin grows concerned, suggesting that Sarah might have advised differently if she were still present. The queen resists at first, refusing to admit it, but when the idea of Sarah apologizing is mentioned, she shows a brief moment of interest, though she quickly hides it. Godolphin then reaches out to Sarah, convincing her to try to repair the relationship by writing to the queen. Meanwhile, Abigail senses that the queen still has lingering feelings for Sarah and could be pulled back toward her. To prevent this, she lies, claiming that she has reviewed the accounts and believes Sarah and her husband were stealing money from the queen. The queen refuses to believe it, showing that despite everything, her trust in Sarah has not fully disappeared. As time passes, The queen grows increasingly restless waiting for a letter from Sarah. It eventually arrives at the palace, but before it can reach her, Abigail intercepts it and burns it. Not long after, Harley pushes further, now trying to convince the queen to remove John Churchill from his military command. Sidney Godolphin is shocked, especially since John has just secured a major victory in the war. But the queen, now fully influenced and emotionally unstable, makes a drastic decision. She declares that John has been stealing from the crown, orders him removed from his position, and announces that the war will be brought to an end. At the same time, she orders both John and Sarah to be banished. Far from the palace, Sarah and John are at home when soldiers arrive outside their estate, confirming that they have been officially removed from power. Back at the palace, Abigail has finally achieved everything she set out to gain: status, security, and the position of the queen's favorite. In the final scene, Abigail sits in the queen's chambers, reading a book. One of the rabbits wanders close to her. Without hesitation, she presses her heel down on it, crushing it into the floor. The rabbit lets out a sharp squeal and struggles before managing to slip away. The noise wakes the queen. She stirs, then becomes alert and furious. Struggling with her body, she drags herself out of bed and moves toward the wall, clearly in pain but driven by anger. She yells at Abigail to come to her. Abigail immediately drops to her knees and moves over, taking her place beside the queen and beginning to rub her leg. As she does this, the queen tugs her hair, reminding Abigail of who really is in charge here. The final scene condenses the entire film into a single, controlled exchange of power, using almost no dialogue. Abigail is first shown alone, reading, a visual that suggests she has reached a place of comfort and status. She is no longer in the kitchen, no longer struggling to survive. When a rabbit approaches her, she deliberately presses her heel down on it, asserting control over something smaller and more vulnerable. It is the first clear moment where Abigail expresses power without disguise. In that act, she mirrors the system she has climbed through, where power is exercised downward. But the reaction is immediate. The rabbit's squeal wakes the queen, and everything changes. The queen, despite her physical weakness, becomes the dominant force in the room. She drags herself out of bed, her body struggling, but her authority intact. Abigail responds instantly. She drops what she is doing, kneels, and returns to service. Despite everything she has achieved, she is back in a submissive position, tending to someone else's needs. The setting has changed, the clothes have changed, but the structure has not. The rabbits moving around them reinforce this visually. They are not just symbols of the queen's grief anymore. They exist within her control, contained, dependent, and silent. As the image overlays Abigail with the rabbits, the meaning becomes clear. She has not replaced Sarah as an equal. She has been absorbed into Anne's world as something to be kept, handled, and controlled. Anne's final action, grabbing Abigail by the hair, removes any remaining ambiguity. It is not affectionate. It is possessive. It establishes hierarchy in the most physical way possible. Abigail is not truly a companion. She is something the queen owns access to, something she can control at will. What makes this moment particularly effective is how it reflects Abigail's entire arc. She entered the story as someone powerless, used by others, forced into survival through submission. She believed that by gaining status and proximity to power, she could escape that condition. But the ending reveals that she has only re-entered the same structure from a different angle. She is still dependent, still vulnerable to someone else's moods, still required to perform and obey. The act of crushing the rabbit becomes ironic in retrospect. It is Abigail attempting to assert dominance, to prove, perhaps even to herself, that she now holds power. But the immediate correction from the queen shows that her power is limited and conditional. She can dominate what is beneath her, but she cannot escape what is above her. The scene ultimately reframes the idea of being the favorite. It is not a position of equality or control, but one of proximity, close to power, but never holding it. Abigail has achieved the highest position she can within that system, yet it comes with the same fundamental constraint. She exists at the mercy of someone else. The ending of The Favorite can be understood as a quiet collapse into three separate, inescapable forms of personal punishment, where each character ends up trapped by the very thing they pursued. For the Queen, the ending represents the hollow victory of absolute control. By removing Sarah and elevating Abigail, she becomes the central figure of power, no longer challenged or restrained in the way she once was. However, this does not mean she is no longer influenced. Abigail still shapes her decisions, but in a very different way. What the Queen truly needed was not obedience, but genuine emotional connection and guidance. Sarah, despite her harshness, provided structure, honesty, and was willing to oppose the Queen when necessary. Abigail, in contrast, chooses to flatter her and give her what she wants, even when it is not in her best interest. The result is that the Queen is left more isolated than before, surrounded by attention, but without real support. She's no longer grounded, only indulged. Unable to trust or truly connect, she retreats further into instability. Her physical act of pulling Abigail's hair in the final scene reflects this shift. She replaces intimacy with dominance, because control is the only language she has left. Abigail's ending is more deceptive. On the surface, she achieves everything she set out to do. However, the reality of her position is fundamentally unchanged in structure. She is still required to serve, to please, and to anticipate the needs of someone more powerful than her. Sarah's ending, in contrast, is defined by loss rather than entrapment. She is the only one who understood both the political stakes and the emotional reality of her relationship with the Queen. While she was controlling, her connection with the Queen was rooted in shared history and a degree of honesty that neither the Queen nor Abigail can replicate. Her removal from court strips her of both power and purpose. What defines her punishment is not just exile, but awareness. She understands exactly what has been lost and that it has been replaced by something inferior and unstable. What makes the ending particularly effective is that it does not present these outcomes as dramatic downfalls. No one is destroyed outright. Instead, each character is left in a position that superficially resembles success or stability, but is internally unfulfilling and restrictive. Power, in this world, is not liberating, it is isolating. Intimacy, when tied to control, becomes corrosive, and ambition, even when successful, leads not to freedom, but to a different kind of dependence. The end. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And until next time.